Good morning and welcome to another Sunday at the park. Beautiful weather again today. I'm out running my two SRB chassis. I have the Fighting Buggy and the Sand Scorcher. So I thought in this video I'd probably just give you my thoughts on the two builds, good points, bad points, what I think of them and all that kind of good stuff. So if you're interested in these two cars, stick around, stay tuned. Well, these two buggies really don't need any introduction. Well, certainly the Sand Scorcher is such an iconic Tamiya buggy. I had no experience back in the day with either of these or any of the SRB chassis. They were a little bit before my time. So the SRB chassis is essentially just a flat FRP lower deck onto which all the suspension and gearbox are mounted. It uses torsion bar suspension. The design is really basic, really simple, but well, I say simple. The front suspension is such a joy to build, and the way it works is quite fascinating, I find. Anyway, it makes a change. If you come from a lot of more modern day builds, which just tend to be the same formula, double wishbone with coilovers front and rear, building something like this is such a refreshing change. I actually picked up the Fighting Buggy first, and I was so impressed by it that I ended up buying a Sand Scorcher. And as you're looking at them now, they both look somewhat similar in terms of aesthetics. I'm not one for box art, and I wasn't too keen on the blue of the Fighting Buggy. Normally I gravitate to blue, but for some reason I just didn't like the blue on the Fighting Buggy. And for the Sand Scorcher, I am nowhere near skilled enough to do the box art justice. I mean, the box art looks absolutely fantastic, but I am nowhere near good enough for box art. I recently watched Glenn from Tamiya Legends, his video, and RC so-and-so, he did a Scorcher as well. Glenn did an excellent job on the box art. He's got the skill and patience to do it justice. I don't. In fact, truth be told, this car started out red. It was supposed to be a bright metallic red. I think it's TS 85 or 95, one of the two. Unfortunately, I just wasn't able to get a consistent covering. It looked okay from some angles, but at other angles there was kind of dark patches and light patches, and after several attempts at sanding and trying again, I just in the end I just gave up and decided to go with silver, which I guess, I don't know, I'm liking it. I wasn't too keen while I was making it, but once in a lot of cases I find it's not until you get into the very end and it's all coming together that you can really kind of appreciate and make any decision on whether you're happy with the final look. Same with the Fighting Buggy. I wasn't sure what I was going to do at first. I knew I wasn't going to do box art, and in actual fact the design I had in mind for this is, once I started building it, particularly the suspension at the rear, which is an absolute marvel, you get a very sense of, I guess you call it the mechanical, old style industrial. It just reminded me of a steam locomotive for some reason, and so I wanted to do a color scheme along those lines with lots of grays and blacks and metallic shades. That's how that color scheme came out on the Fighting Buggy, and then just by pure accident the Sand Scorcher ended up being a similar color scheme. You have to apologize, the driver figure, unfortunately my driver decided he wasn't going to buckle up, and so he got ejected on a rollover. So I have to stick him back in at some point. The Fighting Buggy, what can I tell you about that? It is a totally amazing car. When you build it, you start with a rear gearbox and rear suspension, and yeah, I can't say enough good things about this. I've come from several Kyosho Legendary Series re-release builds. If you've been watching my channel for a while, you'll know. And Kyosho's quality has always really impressed me. Lots of metal parts, really well designed. And for a while, I'd kind of got into this kind of mentality, I guess, that Tamiya tended to be somewhat more plasticky, and Kyosho, certainly their Legendary Series buggies were much more high-end, all metal parts. The Fighting Buggy changed my mind. I don't think there's with the exception of the driver figure and the body and a few other small minor bits and pieces, the chassis is almost entirely metal. And by the time you finish building this amazing rear suspension design, you're just left with this huge chunk of metal. Really gives you a sense that it's a high quality kit. The rear suspension is an absolute joy. If you watch my Fighting Buggy running videos, you can see it running in slow motion. When it's on the bench, you kind of you think this is going to be terrible, because you've got a monoshock rear end with no anti-roll bar, stabilizer bar, and so the whole thing just kind of pivots. If you can do it one-handed there, like that. The shock is not being compressed at all, and it seems really counterintuitive. It doesn't seem like it's going to be very good suspension because it's just wobbling like this. But when you actually drive it, it actually works surprisingly well. A lot better than I thought it would be. It's only when the suspension starts to get really compressed, the actual spring compresses. And actually reading Tamiya's literature on it, it's actually designed like that. They call it their, I think the acronym is like their free floating something suspension system. Yeah, this design is unusual, and that's what drew me to the buggy, but it works really well. It's only when the suspension is compressed beyond a certain point that the actual spring comes into play, and the rear reservoir. I mean, totally unique, this rear reservoir. Incidentally, I spent a very long time trying to get all of the air bubbles out of this remote oil tank. I succeeded, and then the first time I run it, air bubbles reappeared in it. So my advice is don't worry too much about air bubbles. I think it's mostly just due to the fact that when you hold the buggy up or carry the buggy, air can get trapped in the system. So I wouldn't really worry about it, to be honest. What else can I tell you? The first time you build one of these, you will be shocked at the amount of chassis flex on these things. I mean, it is almost laughable. It's like the chassis has got the strength of a piece of toast or soggy bread. When you put the body on, it adds a bit of rigidity because the front body pin post kind of adds some rigidity, but without the body on it, it is terrible. And certainly when I finished building it, I thought this is going to be so awful when it comes to driving. It's just going to be completely useless. But yeah, objectively, yeah, it's terrible, but it is so much fun. It's hard to describe. It's just a laugh. And you know, that's what the hobby's all about, having a good time, having fun. This will not win any races. The steering setup on this is terrible, and no matter how much I played with it, you just can't get a lot of steering angle from the stock steering system. And so this has got the turning circle of the Titanic. Under power, we're talking 10-15 meters turning circle. I mean, this thing just does not want to turn it. Even slowly, it does not want to turn. The Sand Scorcher, which has slightly different front steering system, servo saver, it turns much better, significantly better. So if you're racing or driving in confined spaces, I would definitely go for the Sand Scorcher just because it can turn. I mean, if you modify this steering, which I've seen a lot of people do, then I suspect you can improve the steering somewhat. I know there's a couple of mods that involve just reorientating the servo, but I think one of the downsides to that is you get a lot of bump steer. To me, it's part of the charm of the vehicle. The way it drives is part of the charm, but you do have to be careful with it. Trying to film this car is really tricky because it just doesn't want to turn. After today's filming session, both of them have suffered some minor damage. Actually, it's all body. I don't know if you can tell, but there's supposed to be a little instrument panel in there that got ejected when I hit a tree head on. It just didn't want to turn, and I misjudged it. Downside of trying to drive one-handed and film at the same time. So that's the Fighting Buggy. Surprisingly, it's quicker than you would think it would be, given its heft and its design, and the fact you can only fit a stock motor in there. I suppose you could fit a sport tune or something like that, but I just get with stock 540 Mabuchi. You would think it's slow, but it's actually pretty quick, relatively speaking. The Sand Scorcher is noticeably slower. Now I've had a chance to run them back to back, and that's mainly because I'm using Tamiya's recommended Lifey, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, Lifey 6.6 volt battery. I should mention both of these are designed to take Tamiya's M size Lifey battery, which is about half the size of a standard nickel metal hydride stick pack. Now on the Fighting Buggy, it's possible to remove the battery mounts that Tamiya want you to fit, and you can actually fit a stick pack in there. It'll just fit in the space, and I have no experience with the original, but it seems to me that's originally how it was designed. So why Tamiya went to all the trouble to engineer and provide a smaller battery holder that sits here in the center to mount a smaller battery, I have no idea, but you can fit a standard stick pack in here no problem. On the Sand Scorcher, because it's got a sealed electronics box, it takes a little bit more to do that, and the easiest option is to just mount the battery diagonally across the electronics box or fit a LiPo. I didn't want to do either of those, so I just bit the bullet and got the battery, the Lifey battery. I was just curious to see how long a 1100 milliamp Lifey battery with 6.6 volts would compare, and surprisingly the burn time is pretty good, better than you would think for 1100 milliamps. The runtime is pretty good. Top speed, yeah, I can tell that the Fighting Buggy's got a great top speed. The acceleration is about the same, but yeah, it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Maybe at some point in the future I will make the switch to the LiPo. I doubt it, but maybe I will. And then I'll put a LiPo battery in. As to which one I recommend you get, well, I think they both look awesome. They're both just a lot of fun. Either one of them is great. If you've got the skills when it comes to bodywork and painting and stuff, then I guess the Sand Scorcher would be the obvious choice. But if you're like me and you're not too good at painting and stuff, then the Fighting Buggy has a lot simpler design body, but either one is great. Well, there we go, my thoughts on the Sand Scorcher and Fighting Buggy. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. This is David, signing out.